Good morning, church. We're within 10 days of Christmas already, so I'd like us to consider an aspect of the Christmas story today. And the part of the Christmas story I'd like to think about is Mary and Joseph's journey to Bethlehem from Nazareth. It would have taken Mary and Joseph about a week, perhaps more, since Mary was heavily pregnant, to travel the approximately 150 kilometers between the two places. And perhaps you can as well, I can well imagine Mary and Joseph being frustrated or complaining about this trip that they had to take, especially considering how far pregnant Mary was. I mean, think about it. The trip was completely unnecessary. They were forced into it basically on a whim, by a whim of the government of the day, so they could take their census. Instead of being able to make Mary feel comfortable at home, Joseph had to leave his work. Carpentry doesn't do itself, so that's a financial penalty. And the two of them had to take a long journey to Bethlehem. And to top it off, perhaps you can imagine Joseph's frustration when they arrive in Bethlehem and they discover that there are no guest rooms available for them, and they end up in a stable. I would not have been pleased, and I'm sure Joseph wasn't pleased either. You can well imagine the kinds of things that they would have said to themselves about how ridiculous it was that they needed to travel. Perhaps you can imagine the resentment that they felt towards the government. What they didn't know, and what we know because we have the benefit of hindsight, is that this was in fact completely necessary. Micah 5 verses 2-5 says this: "But you, O Bethlehem, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be the ruler of Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient of days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel, and he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great unto the ends of the earth, and he shall be their peace." Joseph and Mary had to be in Bethlehem because that's where the Messiah had to be born. God's plan required that to be the case. Thus, behind the whim of the government of the day, we can see God's sovereign control in action. And I think for us, in a time in which governments are exerting more and more control over us, often in ways that are harmful or irritating towards it or to us, I think perhaps we can identify with this part of the Christmas story in a way that maybe we haven't been able to in the past. And I'd like to suggest that we take away the following things. First, be encouraged. God is in control of all that is going on in the world today. I'm going to start that again. First, be encouraged. God is in control of all that is going on in the world today. It is working out towards the ends of his plans, which is encouraging. And we can be encouraged in this because God's plans ultimately work out to the best possible ends. If I may pick on the COVID situation that we found ourselves in this year, a lot has happened, obviously, but whether you are concerned about the virus or the government's response to it, or both, we can all be united in the truth that God is in control, that in these uncertain times, God is still managing what happens throughout the unfurling of history. And that is something that we can be encouraged about. And out of that, secondly, we don't need to fear what's going on in these days and in the days to come. Yes, things may not be pleasant, and there might be much evil and much bad that carries on, or that comes to us in the next in the years that are to come. But we don't need to fear because ultimately we rest in God and God is in control. And thirdly, while we can and must trust God, and while we can and must be encouraged, we must also consider our own actions. Mary and Joseph were both obedient to God in the first place. You can consider the rest of the Christmas story and the lead up to their journey to look at that. But this is an example for us. we can't control the grand events that unroll around us and unravel around us. We can, though, decide what we're going to do in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And the challenge for us, I think, is to be faithful to God in the tasks that He calls us to, but also to be faithful to God in the small individual actions of the day. And in terms of our behavior, morally, we need to be perfect before the Lord as far as it is possible. And yes, we don't get this right all the time, but our responsibility is clearly to trust God, not fear, follow His commands, and do what He expects of us in this life. And I think those are the three things we can take away from this story today. So may the Lord bless you and keep you, and I hope things go well with you.